Hello, and welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm Luke Bernstein, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. This week in Harrisburg, Governor Shapiro unveiled his latest budget. Here today, we have two leading voices to break down that budget and talk about what it means for you when we come back.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We have a great show for you today. Just this week in Harrisburg, Governor Shapiro unveiled his 2025-2026 budget proposal. Here with us today is our first guest, State Senator Greg Rothman. Who better to break down the budget than a state senator who spent an entire career in business and has been working on different proposals that can impact our Commonwealth? State Senator Rothman, welcome.
Thank you.
So we had a big week in Harrisburg. Governor Shapiro unveiled his budget. Walk through your initial takes. It was over $50 billion in the proposal, 7.5% spending increase. Walk us through your initial reaction.
Yeah, $51.5 billion budget. And it's unsustainable. It's irresponsible. It puts us in a horrible fiscal area. I mean, this last 4 years have been rough because government has not controlled their spending in Washington. Now we're bringing those same philosophy to Pennsylvania, and it's not sustainable. It will drain any reserves we have. It inflates the revenue estimates far beyond what the Independent Fiscal Office says, and it's irresponsible spending. I mean, it's just $51.5 billion. It's just too much.
So with the budget proposal, there was a 7.5% spending increase. Overall spending increase is 7.5%. With walked through with this proposal, so increased spending at a time where revenues aren't matching. So both the governor's office as well as the Independent Fiscal Office said we are approaching a structural deficit. Walk through what that structural deficit means.
Yeah, keep in mind the last couple of years we've used ARPA money and COVID relief money and reserves to fill holes, which I don't think is responsible. And
so what you mean? So
$3 billion that we got.
$3 billion of federal funding to balance the state budget.
The state's
which is
operating
one time.
Budget. Yes.
Okay.
Which you don't do that in your household, right? That's not what you do. That money should have been spent on structural items, right? So you put a new roof on. But what the proposal is will not only drain any reserves we have, but we're estimating that by 2029 we could have a multi-billion-dollar, I think it's $27 billion hole. I mean, our budget's only $51.5 billion, so you think about the whole of it. And look, the federal government can do it because they can print money. It's irresponsible for them to print money, but we don't have the ability to do that. So this budget is not realistic, and the Republicans in the Senate and on the Appropriations Committee are going to make sure there is a responsible budget.
So what else is part of this budget? So in this budget, it encompasses all of the state spending, all the priorities. What is part of the whole package?
Yeah, so there's no, look, I ran a business, and anybody who runs a business knows you don't look at your top line to get to your bottom line. You look at your expenses, and there's no right sizing. There's no, let's figure out a way to do this better. We have thousands of square feet of office space sitting empty. We have workers working from home who need to come back to work. There isn't, hey, how are we going to be more productive or more efficient in our spending? There's all kinds of discussions on the federal level now about government efficiency and waste and fraud and abuse. This just spends more. And by the way, where does the money come from? The money comes from the taxpayers. There's multi-billion dollars in tax increases in this budget. I mean, the governor calls it, revenue, but it's really coming from the people of Pennsylvania and the businesses of Pennsylvania, and it's not responsible. And we just came off of 4 really bad years for the economy, chaos in the economy. We're about to come out of that. We're starting to come out of it. We're seeing that. And it's like the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the governor's office is going to say, nope, we want to do what they did in the federal level.
So in terms of the overall proposal, challenges on the spending side, preserving the rainy day fund is going to be important. How, as you look, how has your approach been and proposals to move forward in order to bridge that gap?
Yeah, so in the past we've said, look, you can cut tax rates and build revenue. What you can't do is raise tax rates and build revenue, because businesses can move, and they'll move out of Pennsylvania. We want to be like Ohio, where businesses are coming here. They're going to come here because of the regulatory climate. They're going to come here because of the tax rates, and our tax rates are just too high.
Tax rates and regulatory climate is something I want to pause here and come back to, because I want to ask Senator Rothman how tax rates can get this economy in Pennsylvania moving again, and we'll hear more from him when we come back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm Luke Bernstein, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, and we are talking with State Senator Greg Rothman about the governor's budget proposal that was unveiled this week. We left off talking about the importance of getting our economy going. There was some movement on corporate tax reform and others. So walk through the governor's proposal on the corporate tax reform, and how do you see this impacting Pennsylvania, and what would you do to make Pennsylvania more competitive on the tax structure?
Yeah, so I like the fact the governor wants to accelerate the corporate net income tax. That's Senator Ahmet and I worked on that in the Senate. The problem is they're going to expand it by doing something called combined reporting, which is basically double taxation. They're going to take revenues you have in other states that you're paying taxes on in other states and try to tax them in Pennsylvania. It's bad. It's bad for business. Businesses won't come here. They don't want to be taxed in multiple states.
So if you're a large company like Intel, Pennsylvania lost a huge plant. Intel went to Ohio, and you're looking at that proposal. How would that impact that decision?
Yeah, so if you have a company based in Ohio and they sell something in New Jersey, they pay taxes in one state, not both. Ohio doesn't make them also pay the tax in Ohio. And so it's where you book those sales and book those profits, and there's a way to do it. What you don't do is double tax it, and that's why our business community doesn't want that, because our Department of Revenue will say, well, you're going to pay taxes on revenue you make in other places. And I akin to say, well, you got to pay taxes on what you make and also what your brother made in, living in Colorado. Wait a minute, that's not fair. And certainly businesses are not going to come here if they're going to be treated that way.
So why not just expedite the cuts without coupling it with that combined reporting, almost a poison pill provision?
Look, we worked on this in the House. I worked on it for 7 years in the House, and the Democrats would not agree to cut tax rates without increasing what they tax. And so it's disingenuous, and it's the reason why the business community didn't support it until Governor Wolf actually did it. It was one of my original bills where we actually cut the tax rates without combined reporting.
In addition to tax reform, in this proposal, there was increasing the minimum wage. There was legalizing recreational marijuana. There was comments about a statewide energy plan. There was taxing skill games. There were a lot of different pieces, education included. What are some of the pieces you take away, some of your constituents and Senate Republican priorities? What do you see as priority areas for you and the Senate Republican caucus to focus on in this session?
Yeah, well, so, the speech was 90 minutes long, 91 minutes long. It was something for everybody if you're running for president of the United States in 4 years. The minimum wage, anybody who runs a business knows that they're not paying anybody $7.25 an hour or $9 an hour for tip staff, and it's just someone who has no sense of reality of what's going on in our business community. Most businesses that I talk to need employees and are happy to pay. And businesses that I've dealt with for the last 40 years, 35 years, will pay the maximum amount they can pay to an employee and still make a profit. There's no thought about minimum wage, but it's a political issue, and the governor is first and foremost a politician.
So in terms of education spending, which has been very important, you recently worked very diligently to restore field trips at Cumberland Valley School District. I know education is important to you. How did you view the education spending there and the field trip background there?
I have 2 more kids in public schools, too. But look, there's no discussion about the failing schools in his budget address. There's no talk about school choice and lifeline scholarships and giving a chance to these kids to get out. There's no metrics of how are we going to improve our schools. He talked a little bit about our universities, but the reality is we have a declining population. And we have one of the lowest populations of kindergarten classes in modern times, yet we continue to spend more and more money. And so how much we're spending per child makes a big deal. And this budget has huge increases in education spending, too. Without any acceptable, no business would, businesses invest, and education is an investment, but you'd want outcomes. What are the outcomes we want? And what are we going to do to change the demographics in Pennsylvania? So we have a plan, and we're going to put forth as a Senate our plan, and it's going to be responsible and sustainable, and it's going to attract businesses, not push businesses away.
So one final question while I have you. Super Bowl Sunday, what's your prediction?
Saquon Barkley, Eagles, Super Bowl champions, 44-36.
You heard it here. Go Birds. And with that, State Senator Greg Rothman with us. Thank you for joining the program. And don't go away, because we have another leading voice to break down this budget when we come back next.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
Plausibility of their proposals? Yeah.
All right, everyone, stand by.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and we have a very special guest for the second half of today's show. Dave Taylor, president of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Dave, we were just talking about the governor's budget proposal that just occurred this week in Harrisburg. What's your initial reaction to Governor Shapiro's budget?
Well, the fundamental fact of Pennsylvania state government is that we have a structural deficit. And by that, I mean that mandatory spending is increasing faster than the growth in state revenue, and that the governor's plan completely fails to recognize that reality, which makes it a very poor starting point for further discussions. I mean, we need to deal with not just that structural deficit, but the underlying forces that are driving it, which is Pennsylvania's demographic crisis, that we have a large and growing population of senior citizens who are beyond their working years, and not enough younger people in their working years to pay the taxes to keep state government going at its current scale. And so, again, I'm afraid that we can't even use the governor's proposal as a starting point.
So, structural deficit, if I'm watching this from home and I'm managing my household budget, what does that mean? Break that down. So there are more funds going out than there are coming in to go to the spending. So walk through that dynamic and how we're here.
Right. So Pennsylvania is spending more than our tax base can sustain. And that's why every budget winds up being a scramble to find new revenue sources or new pockets of money to loot. Pennsylvania suffers from chronic economic underperformance. That is a big factor in what's driving our demographic crisis, that, of course, people go where the jobs are. And when Pennsylvania is only ever growing at a fraction of the national average, that means that there are better opportunities elsewhere, and that's why we lose so many of our young people who build their lives and careers someplace else.
So declining revenue, declining population, how do we fix that?
Well, I mean, we need to adopt a very vigorous pro-growth agenda for Pennsylvania, that we need to hammer down the baseline costs of creating and keeping jobs. We need to make it easier for small businesses to get started and for incumbent businesses to expand. And I wish that we had leaders who were able to adopt that kind of worldview, because, I mean, Luke, as you know well with your chamber work, ultimately in a free country with a free economy, private sector investment decisions are voluntary. The legislature cannot pass a law compelling people to, operate or hire or expand here in Pennsylvania. Like, these are choices that people make, and that's why our leaders should be laser focused on making our business climate as attractive as possible.
Is there something in the budget that you look to that helps get to that goal?
Well, I mean, it's deeply frustrating because across the board, the governor takes a step forward or proposes taking a step forward and then taking at least one step back. There are individual things that are praiseworthy. I mean, establishing a specific office for review and approval of energy investments, I think that would be very beneficial to the Commonwealth. Certainly the governor living up to the promise that he made to you at the chamber dinner in 2022 with accelerating the phase down of the CNI. But again, in this budget, he proposes that, but there's a trade-off where he's going to complicate tax compliance and eliminate tax certainty. And so, again, if we did the one thing but not the other, we'd be okay. But the idea of doing these different things at the same time, you're better off doing nothing.
So we are here talking with Dave Taylor, and we are going to come back. Do not go anywhere, because we just started scratching the surface, particularly on Pennsylvania energy. We'll hear more when we come back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm Luke Bernstein, here with Dave Taylor, who's the president of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. And we are talking about the governor's budget. And Dave, this is not the final budget, right? So I think the challenge, most people think that when the governor proposes the budget, that's the final budget. It's Super Bowl Sunday. So this is essentially the opening kickoff to a very long process, right? What happens now? So he's presented his budget proposal. Now what happens?
So, yes, you're exactly right. That's a great metaphor. It's merely the kickoff of a long game of 4 quarters. So the proposal goes to the respective appropriations committees in the House and the Senate. Those committees hold comprehensive budget hearings where they will interrogate the respective secretaries and leaders of the different agencies and departments, and that it'll be a process that will lead up to the enactment of a final budget, hopefully by the constitutional deadline of June 30. So there's a lot of grist for the mill. And that undoubtedly the governor is not going to get everything that he wants, which in this instance I think is a good thing.
So one of the things that was I guess, in any budget proposal, there are many initiatives and plans, proposals, all the different pieces that encompass that. And you take all of it into one proposal. But as the governor proposed legalizing recreational marijuana, he has proposed taxing skill games. He has proposed a number of other areas that always go in, any governor does. The one big piece of this, I think, relevant to Pennsylvania is on energy. The governor unveiled an energy plan last week, talked about that as part of this budget proposal. From the manufacturing standpoint, how does the Pennsylvania manufacturers view that energy proposal, and what do you like? What should we be doing in terms of energy in Pennsylvania? Probably our #1 opportunity to really generate long-term economic output for the state.
Yes, I would agree. And again, energy is very important for manufacturing because our manufacturers consume enormous amounts of energy. That manufacturing, no matter what you're making, it's a multi-stage process where you're taking raw materials or component parts to yield a finished good. Every step of production requires energy and lots of it. What the governor is putting forward is, I hate to be unkind, it's nonsense. That the governor, his plan includes imposing a carbon tax, which would be the same as Reggie, just that we would administer it to ourselves, which is like, again, a deeply unwise step for our economy to increase the cost of doing business.
So to the average person walking home, what is a carbon tax?
Well, it would impose a new and additional tax on energy production related to the release of carbon dioxide. What we need to recognize is that Pennsylvania has greatly reduced emissions over the last decade, and that actually almost 15 years now, that we've led the nation in reducing emissions. Our air is cleaner than it has ever been, and that we've led the nation, as the nation has led the world in reducing emissions of carbon dioxide and the sulfur dioxides and all these other things that are considered bad for the environment. So it makes no sense to turn the screws deeper on the people who are doing the best job of reducing emissions.
So how do we move forward with that energy plan? What should that look like?
Well, I think that there's a problem of hubris, that the governor has a command and control view of the economy and especially the energy sector. He has a plan that would overthrow our competitive market for electricity and would mandate that half of all Pennsylvania electricity come from his preferred sources. By the way, several of them don't even exist yet. So the judgment of one person cannot take the place of the 13 million Pennsylvanians and all of the various businesses, industries, generators, and the workers in those energy fields. We need the governor to recognize that this is a market. We need to let the market evolve, and we need to have competition based on price rather than having the government mandate what energy we can use.
Turning to tax, we talked a little bit about tax earlier. What are some of the things in the budget proposal, or even outside the budget proposal, that you think could really get the economy moving here in Pennsylvania?
Well, it is, as I said, reducing the baseline cost of creating and keeping jobs. We have had the highest corporate income tax in the nation for far too long. We got the boulder rolling under Governor Wolf as he was headed out the door, but still our rate is very high, and that the current trajectory would get us down to like the same rate that Indiana is today. So it's the right medication, but the wrong dosage. So accelerating the phase down of the CNI to get it down to a level that's equivalent to our competitor states would help. But while doing that, we can't increase tax complexity. We can't reduce certainty.
So simplify.
Simplify.
So
every step.
I would love to continue this, but one question: Eagles or Chiefs today?
I am rooting for spring training.
We heard it here first. Thank you very much for joining us at today's Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Come back next week, and we'll be excited to see you.